Hey guys, and welcome to this session on virtual environments. The whole point of this video is to give you a basic run through as to what a virtual environment is, what they're used for, and we're going to look at a worked example on how to get them set up on your local machine. So, suppose this blue box represents your entire computer here, and now suppose at some point you've gone ahead and you've installed Python. You've then got pip installed, and then imagine at some point you've installed a load of libraries. So suppose you've got pandas, Seaborn, scikit-learn, TensorFlow, Keras request. You've got a load of things installed. Especially if you've been coding for a while, you've likely got a load of things installed that you've completely forgotten about. I know I certainly have. Now, suppose you then want to then make two different projects. Now, suppose you've got project A, and this requires the use of Seaborn and Matplotlib. So suppose you're trying to go ahead and make some graphs. Now, you could make this project and just rely on the version of Seaborn and Matplotlib you installed a long time ago. Some cases that might be okay, but then suppose you then got project B, which uses pandas, NumPy, scikit-learn, and then you can see where this is going. Imagine you've got multiple different projects. At some point down the line, you may then start to get conflicting versions, because what if project A requires a specific version of Seaborn, and then later on down the line you've then gone ahead and made a new project which requires an older version. And that's where things can get really tricky, and then your versions of these different libraries can start to really become an issue. So what we can do with the use of a virtual environment is effectively have almost like, you can think of it almost like a virtual machine or a virtual isolated box inside your computer, and this contains specific versions of your different libraries. So what we could do in this example, imagine we wanted to make some plots. We could create an isolated environment where the Python version that runs in here has, Seaborn version X and Matplotlib version Y. And, you can go into this environment, do your stuff in here, you can come back out, and then you can then use these versions here. Same for project B. You may want to use an older version of pandas. You may want to use some scikit-learn to do a bit of machine learning. So you might install some specific versions of these into their own environment. And with these environments, you can switch into them, you can switch out, you can effectively write down all the requirements in a text file. So if your friend wants to use the same versions, they can make a virtual environment and they can say, cool, let's install this version, and this version, and I've basically got the same environment as you in my own kind of virtual space here. And I'm going to do a version of this now in VS Code, and I'm going to show you what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to show you the way I generally tend to do things, and I'm going to show you using two different projects which have two different sets of requirements. So I'm in VS Code, and if I quickly hit ls, I've got a graph project and a linear regression project. So let me quickly get these out. My graph project, I've got some simple code here which just requires the use of Seaborn and Matplotlib. I'm simply going to take some data and then try and plot it, and I'm then going to try and save it as well. And then in a different folder, which I'll come to in the second part of the video, I've got some linear regression code, which is going to do a simple regression and output some results. So the problem is, let me quickly run pip list. Yeah, pip list simply shows what you've got installed, and this is kind of like, these are all my global packages, and there's a hell of a lot, right? So these are things which I've installed over time and, to be honest, generally forgotten about. And this is not ideal. So what I want to do is effectively create an isolated environment which only has these installed. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new terminal. And I'm going to rename this on the right-hand side here. So I'm going to call this graph, and I'll leave that one for the time being. And now what I want to do inside here is cd into this directory. So if I do cd graph project, hit ls, and I can see I've got scatterplots.py. So just one more time, if I do pip list, I'm currently seeing that I've got all of these here. I've probably got Seaborn installed, to be honest. There it is here. But this is where you can get issues, because I've got this version installed globally. I might actually want a newer version to go ahead and do this. So, assuming that you've got a virtual environment up and running, the way to do it if you haven't is to simply pip install it. So if you were to do pip install, if I type this in correctly, it's going to be virtual env like this. So if you run this in your terminal, that will get it installed for you. So what I want to do here is then go ahead and use virtual env, and then generally the default is to just call them VMs like this, but you can call them whatever you want. So if I do venv graph, for example, this creates a virtual environment inside my graph project folder. So if I now ls here, I've got my scatterplots py Python code and my venv graph virtual environment. And if you open this, you can see it contains all of your kind of Python files. You'll go through and you've got all of your Python stuff in there where you don't need to really concern yourself too much with this. What we're going to do is activate it. And on a Mac, it's simply going to be source, the name of your environment to venv graph. So source, this, activate. So source, name of the virtual environment, bin, activate. And you should see your terminal change. So my terminal is now saying venv graph. Now if I run pip list here, because I've installed nothing into this environment yet, we only get pip, setup tools and wheel. So of course if we try and run this, we've not got Seaborn and matplotlib installed yet. So if we go ahead and install those, if I do pip install Seaborn, when you install Seaborn it's actually going to install matplotlib because it's a dependency of Seaborn. So we'll give that a second to do its stuff and we should be good. And we can actually see here that we've got Seaborn and matplotlib which are good to go. So let's clear the screen and run pip list now. And we can now see that our environment has a load of new things, and of course most of these are the dependencies for Seaborn, but now we've got an environment that's just set up to run this code. So if I was to go ahead and do Python, scatterplots py, hit run, this should now run correctly because it's got all the dependencies it needs in here. And it's going to take its time because my computer's being a bit slow, but there we go. And that's saved plot.png, and there we have it. Now suppose you wanted to give this environment to someone else, you could. So if you type in pip freeze dash, let's call this graph reqs.txt, we should see we get this little text file here, which is pretty good. Now what someone can actually do, suppose you've got, suppose you want to give someone your project, it's a bit old school, but this person you give it to, if they were to do pip install -r graphrex.txt, it's going to install everything from this file into their currently activated Python environment. So suppose you receive this file, you could activate a new environment, take the text file, run pip install -r graphrequirements.txt, hit run, and of course we already have these things satisfied and we are good to go. So just to reiterate that one more time, what I did, I first cd'd into my directory containing the code I want to run here. I can see that my code required the use of Seaborn and matplotlib. So you first create your virtual environment, you're then going to run pip install requirements, make sure you've got them, and then if you then run your code in your virtual environment, you're using the dependencies that you installed specifically into your environment, in this case venv graph. And when you're done, simply run deactivate, and we are now back into our kind of global namespace. So if I run pip list here, I should see the big long one from earlier. And there we go. Okay, so what I want to do now is leave this graph project behind, and we're going to sort of do a rinse and repeat, but with a new project called linear regression. So let me show you what I've got. I've got some basic code here. Let me scroll up. We're using scikit-learn's linear model. We're using matplotlib. We're using NumPy here. This generates some basic kind of synthetic data just to kind of play with. We make some predictions from a linear model and we then plot it. So we know that we need scikit-learn, we need matplotlib, and we need NumPy here. I'm pretty sure that NumPy is actually a dependency of this, but what we'll do is we'll create a new environment from scratch, we'll install these into our new environment once it's activated, run our code, and then we'll then do a deactivation of that environment. So step one is to make our environment. So let me just check where I am. I'm in here, so I need to cd into my linear regression project. Okay, and now I'm in the same space where my code is now. So the first thing we need to do is make our environment. So I'm in the folder linear regression project. You can see that by doing ls here. And the first thing I'm going to do is do virtual env. And let's call this one, we'll call it venv-lr for linear regression. And that's been created, so then we can now activate this. So it's going to be source venv-lr bin activate, and now we should see our terminal change here. And there we have it. So there's venv-lr here. We're going to run pip list, just check that we have the bare bones environment, pip setup tools and wheel. If we do, that's good. So now we can then install our requirements. So I'm going to do scikit learn and matplotlib. And there we have our libraries installed here. So you can see as part of doing this, so when I installed them both, we've now got scikit-learn, matplotlib, and of course NumPy was a dependency here. So I can now clear the screen, and if we do Python linearreg.py, this code should now successfully run because we've installed its dependencies into a fresh new environment. Okay, seems like that took a second to run, but I'm not sure what it's doing in the background. But anyway, there we go. We have plot.png, and we've got our matplotlib outputting a nice example of our linear regression. Of course, I'm not too fussed about what the code's doing in this case. It's more to show how the virtual environments work. And once we're done, in fact, you know what? Before we're done, let's suppose you want to hand this project off to someone else. Pip freeze, and we'll do the old standard. Generally, it's conventions do requirements.txt. So we're basically saying freeze the current requirements we've got and send them off into this requirements.txt file. And there we go. So now if I come back for just a second, we can see, in this case here, I've got my graph requirements, and I've now got the requirements for my other project here. So if you were to give it to someone else, it's a case of course, they make the virtual environment, they take your requirements file, and then they can then simply do pip install -r requirements.txt. And last thing we need to do is just deactivate the environment. So I'll do deactivate, and we see the terminal return back to its normal self, and we can clear the screen. So I know it's a fairly short video, but basically what I've just shown you then is effectively an example of this here. Of course, I didn't use exactly the same libraries. I didn't use pandas here. But basically, that's what I've done. These were the libraries I had installed on my entire machine, kind of globally available. And we then defined 2 new projects where each project had its own virtual environment. And we then installed the specific dependencies into these environments. We also looked at how we can activate and deactivate, and also use the pip freeze commands to save our requirements to file as well. Cheers for watching, guys. I hope you found this helpful, and I will see you all in the next video. Cheers.